In the brutal heat of the North African desert, you can survive a bullet wound, you can survive a mechanical failure, you can even survive being surrounded. But there's one enemy that has a 100% lethality rate, and it doesn't wear a uniform: dehydration. We spend hours debating whether the Tiger tank was better than the Sherman, or if Rommel was a better strategist than Montgomery. But the truth of World War II in the desert is far less cinematic. The most important weapon in the Western Desert wasn't a gun, it was a 6-inch steel pipe. During Operation Crusader in late 1941, the British 8th Army launched a massive, sprawling counter-offensive against the Afrika Korps. On the surface, it looked like a chaotic swirl of tank battles. But beneath the sand, a group of unsung logistical geniuses were fighting a different kind of war. They were building a shadow empire, a secret network of railways and water lines that allowed the British to do the impossible: sustain a modern army in a wasteland that was never meant to support human life. This is the story of how the British weaponized the sand itself through logistics, proving that in the desert, the petrol pump is more powerful than the panzer. The logistical tether. To understand the nightmare of desert logistics, you have to understand the logistical tether. Imagine you are driving a truck across the Sahara. To get 100 gallons of fuel to the front line, your truck has to consume 20 gallons just to get there and 20 gallons to get back. If the front line moves further away, you eventually reach a point where the truck consumes all 100 gallons just to make the trip. At that point, your army stops. It dies. This was the logistical limit that broke every offensive in North Africa. When the Italians invaded Egypt, they stalled because they couldn't feed their men. When O'Connor chased them back, he stalled because his trucks wore out. By November 1941, the British 8th Army was preparing Operation Crusader. The goal was to relieve the besieged rats of Tobruk and push Rommel out of Egypt for good. But to do this, they had to move 118,000 men and 700 tanks into a region with zero natural water, zero roads, and zero shade. The man tasked with solving this was Lieutenant General Sir Wilfrid Lindsell. He wasn't a glory general, you won't find many statues of him, but Lindsell understood a fundamental truth: a tank is just a very expensive paperweight if it doesn't have fuel. He looked at the vast, empty desert, and decided that if the environment wouldn't provide for his army, he would simply bring a piece of England with him. Water was the most basic tactical requirement. In the 120-degree heat of the Libyan plateau, a soldier needs at least 1 gallon of water a day just to stay conscious. For an army of 100,000, that's 100,000 gallons a day, minimum. Before Operation Crusader, the British relied on water cans, thousands of thin, rectangular metal tins. They were a disaster. They leaked, they rusted, and they took up valuable space on trucks that should have been carrying ammunition. Lindsell's solution was audacious. He ordered the construction of the Western Desert Water Pipeline. Royal Engineers and New Zealand labor units began laying a 6-inch pipe starting from the Nile River in Egypt. They pushed it 140 miles into the deep desert. They didn't just lay pipe. They built massive underground storage reservoirs, some capable of holding 5 million gallons, hidden beneath the sand to protect them from Luftwaffe bombing raids. The tactical insight here is massive. By pumping water directly to the front, the British liberated nearly 3,000 trucks from water duty. In military terms, this drastically improved their teeth-to-tail ratio. While Rommel was using half his transport capacity just to keep his men from dying of thirst, the British were using that same capacity to bring up shells, spare parts, and fresh troops. Water wasn't just a beverage, it was a strategic advantage. It allowed the British to position their forward supply depots in places the Germans thought were impossible to inhabit. While the water flowed through the pipes, the bulk of the army had to move on rails. Trucks are fragile. They break down in the heat. Their tires are shredded by the jagged stone desert, and they consume an enormous amount of fuel. Lindsell and his engineers decided to build a railway where none existed. The desert railway was extended from Mersa Matruh toward the Libyan border at a record-breaking pace. Miles of track were laid every single day by New Zealand railway construction companies, often under the shadow of German Stuka attacks. The tactical advantage was enormous. It comes down to tonnage per gallon. A single train could deliver 1,000 tons of supplies in one trip. To move that same 1,000 tons by truck would require a convoy of 250 vehicles. Those 250 vehicles would need 250 drivers, 250 sets of spare tires, and would consume thousands of gallons of petrol just to make the trip. The railway acted as a steel backbone. It allowed the British to build up a massive surplus of supplies at the railhead. By the time Operation Crusader began, the British had 45 days of supplies stored in the shadow front: food, fuel, and ammunition. Rommel, meanwhile, was relying on a just-in-time delivery system from Tripoli, 600 miles away. If a single British submarine sank a German tanker in the Mediterranean, Rommel's tanks literally stopped mid-battle. The British, thanks to their railway, could afford to lose a dozen supply ships and still keep fighting for a month. The psychological side of logistics is often overlooked. Courage is a finite resource. Imagine you are a British tanker in the middle of the Cauldron battle. You've been fighting for 18 hours. Your tank is low on fuel. You're down to your last 5 shells. And you haven't had a hot meal in 3 days. In a typical desert battle, this is when you retreat. You have to. But during Operation Crusader, the British implemented forward supply depots. Because of the pipeline and the railway, Lindsell was able to push mountains of supplies just miles behind the actual combat zone. When a British unit ran low on fuel, they didn't have to drive 50 miles back to a base. They drove 5 miles to a forward supply depot hidden in a wadi. They were refueled, rearmed, and back in the fight within 2 hours. This is the definition of sustainability. Operation Crusader was a slugging match. It wasn't won by a single brilliant maneuver. It was won by the fact that the British could get knocked down and get back up again, while Rommel's forces, once depleted, stayed down. There's a famous quote often attributed to Rommel: "The desert is a tactician's paradise, but a quartermaster's nightmare." He was referring to exactly what Lindsell had mastered. Rommel was a genius at moving the teeth, the tanks, but he neglected the tail, the logistics. Lindsell made the tail so strong that the teeth could bite forever. Operation Crusader was a messy, confused victory, but it succeeded in relieving Tobruk and pushing the Axis out of Cyrenaica. The ultimate lesson isn't about the tanks. It's about infrastructure as a weapon. The first lesson is environmental adaptation. The British didn't just endure the desert. They engineered it. They treated the lack of water as a tactical problem to be solved with a pipeline, not an act of God to be suffered. The second lesson is the efficiency of scale. By choosing the railway over the truck, the British used their industrial might to overcome the logistical tether. They proved that in modern war, the winner isn't necessarily the one with the best gun, but the one who can keep that gun firing the longest. Finally, we see the template for the future. The logistical lessons Lindsell learned in the Shadow supply line of 1941 were the direct ancestors of the Red Ball Express in Normandy and the massive Mulberry harbors of D-Day. The British learned that if you control the flow of supplies, you control the pace of the war. General Richard O'Connor once said that logistics are the things that prevent you from doing what you want to do. Sir Wilfrid Lindsell reversed that. He made logistics the thing that allowed the Eighth Army to do the impossible. The Shadow supply line might be buried under decades of shifting sands, but the principle remains. Victory is the beautiful flower, but logistics is the dirt it grows in. Without the pipe and the rail, there would be no desert rats, no Victoria Crosses, and no victory in Africa. Next time you see a photo of a tank in the desert, don't just look at the cannon. Look at the fuel cans on the back. Look at the dust in the distance where the trucks are moving. That's where the war was actually won. This has been the story of the Shadow supply line, the forgotten infrastructure of Operation Crusader, and the men who won the war with clipboards and welding torches.